Board of Education. We already met in executive session right before now, and we've already done the salute to the flag and the roll call. I just would like to draw your attention to the statement of public notice. It tells you how the meeting is run, and it talks about how if you come up to the mic, we really want you to write your name on the clipboard and tell us your name and address. And if you forget, I'll try to wave to you and tell you, because we need to have that information. This board meeting is being recorded, so I just wanted to point that out to you. And we don't usually respond when people are up making their comments. We have the time for that later for board response. So if we just sit here and look at you, that's why. If you're asking us a question, we'll try to respond to the things that we can respond to later. And I think that that's it. We are up to student recognition. We have a lot of students here to be recognized from a number of different teams. The board is going to come down in the audience during the student recognition, so we'll all move down there. Okay?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. It's always an exciting opportunity when we get to begin our meeting by honoring some of the accomplishments of our staff and our students. So I certainly thank you all for joining us this evening. At this time, I'm going to ask our athletic director, Mr. Richard Cello, to help lead our ceremonies.
Thank you, Mr. Marcarian. I appreciate that. It's my pleasure to be here again to recognize some of our student athletes from the recently completed winter season, although it doesn't seem like winter's ever going to end this year. And this is members of our ski race team, our boys and girls fencing teams, and our girls indoor track team. So all three have enjoyed great seasons as teams, and we also have some outstanding individual accomplishments that will be spoken of tonight. So first, if he's ready, I'd like to invite Mr. John Fico to come forward to introduce one of his outstanding young men and describe his awards and championships.
Hi, everybody. Didn't know I was going to be doing this, but it is my pleasure to introduce to you Daniele Colbertaldo. He is a 4-year varsity letter winner. He is, as a freshman, third team All-State award winner. He is also a two-time first team All-State recipient, and if not for an injury, it would have been 3 times. He has led his team to being second overall on the state. He is also a 2-time junior Olympian, which is quite impressive. In the fall, he's going to be attending Hobart College, although he was accepted to Vail Academy. And if any of you know what that means to ski racing, it's pretty impressive. Tonight, he is here to be recognized, though, as the giant slalom state champion for the state of New Jersey, which is an amazing accomplishment. And clapping for that, you know, is appreciated, but what you should clap for the most is that he's a great guy. He's a great kid. He's shown his team great leadership. And I'm going to miss him as an athlete, but more so as a person. So thanks for a great 4 years, buddy. I said Daniele. Oh, Daniele Colbertaldo.
Mom wants you up here for a picture. Coach Fico. is Tim Mooney here yet? Yep, there he is, back there. I'd like to call Coach Tim Mooney to come forward. He's got a couple individual recipients as well as the girls indoor track team, which won the state section championship this winter. So an outstanding season for them. And again, looking forward to big things from them this spring as well.
Hello. One of our individual ones actually is out sick today, but that was Kat Lane. She ended up winning the state section in pole vault, won the junior girls school record holder in that as well. Before I go to the girls team, we also have an individual winner on the boys side, who was the Scotland Conference, won the championship in the 55-meter dash, and also was involved in school record back and forth on that several times. That's senior Tyler Jurowicz. So Tyler, come on up. Tyler just ran, the boys ran very well. Tyler runs from the 55 up to the 400. They ran Penn relays this weekend. They did a great job. They ran their best time they've run in several years, just missing the school record. On the girls' side, we have a rather large group, about 20 girls. One I just mentioned was Kat, she's out sick. But the girls won the indoor sectional championship this year in Group 4. Go down to Toms River, and I guess that was back in February. But the accomplishment was good in itself. It made it a little bit nicer because they beat one of the teams that's pretty highly regarded throughout actually the entire country, Columbia High School. You may have seen some of their girls on the front page of Ledger 3 days ago. And they have an extremely good team, so it was a great upset, a lot of fun. So they did an outstanding job. We have a big group, but the probably the nicest part about it is that they had a good balance between the track and the field. There's girls here that scored from all grade levels, from freshman through senior, contributed to that. It wasn't just a couple of kids from one group. We had distance runners scored, we had sprinters, we had throwers, and we had jumpers score all of them. In almost a perfect even balance between the field and the track. So it made it a lot of fun. Very, great accomplishment as a team, and really proud to be their coach. Okay? All right, girls, so we're going to come up, and I'm assuming you're going to stay up here because people are going to want to take pictures of you. Okay. And it figures the next one I open up. Did Sophia Verdi get here yet? Okay, there's a couple that I knew were still late coming in. And we have Kelly Von Balen. Come on down, girls. Let's call your name. Sophie Spring. Reagan Acey. Kelly Corley. Jessica Creedon. Abby Edge. Nikki Grabowski. Emily Hirsch. Christy Hom. Lauren Kawakami. Alex Quiros. Lissy Laham. Shay McCoy, our senior captain. Liz Newman. Gianna Parambo. Abby Regner. Natura San Foster. And Sarah Spring. Okay, so there you have it, state champions. You know, the nice part was our team's about 3 times the size of the girls, but all the girls that are here tonight all competed in that meet. Those were the kids that were the competitors for our varsity, basically. Congratulations, girls.
Thank you, Coach Moody, and to the ladies and to the coaching staff, congratulations on an outstanding winter season. Now a team that has an awful lot of hardware, meaning trophies, stocked up in my office right now that I'm trying to find room in our trophy cases to fit, is our boys and girls fencing teams, which both enjoy a wonderful winter season. So I would like to introduce one of our head coaches, Slava Danilov, who will introduce members from both teams and will present their certificates.
Our both teams, boys and girls teams, continue to dominate in New Jersey. This year, boys won district championship and took second place at state championship. It's boys teams always in the last, I think, something like 9 years in a row in the top 6 places. So I believe we have to be proud of our boys who always in the top. Girls team also did very well. They took 4th place at district championship and got top 8 at state. So they did great result. So gift certificates for girls. Okay. Amanda Choi. Liam Choi. They're sisters. And Hamilton. Boys, Ray, Campereja. Jacob Klein. And Brennan. We have our full team, Will Pizano. Mark Simeon. Boba Shetlo. We have Robert Ford. Salam Hussein. Jake Lee. Alex Massa. Paul Melander. Ula Krač. Kemal Shakur. Who is his brother? Felix Sim. and Alex Van. Congratulations for
And once again, congratulations to all our student athletes for their not only their championships, but their hard work and the class way that they represent Ridge High School out and about the state meet competition. I think that's the thing that makes all of us most proud. The young men and young ladies, awesome season, and we look forward to bigger and better things as we move forward, and I'm looking forward to coming back, hopefully in the springtime. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shello, and how about a big round of applause for all the student athletes and coaches that came out tonight. Great job. It's always fun to celebrate success, so congratulations. At this stage of our meeting, we're going to go back up to the stage for forum. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go backwards in the agenda a little bit. Go back to student representative. We were here. Can you tell everyone your name again?
Hi guys, my name is Shane McCoy. I'm the class president for the senior class. I'm filling in for Alexa Thomas, their school president. And I'm just here to update you on what we've been doing as student government. We just recently had a fundraiser called Mr. Ridge. It's our 6th year doing it, and we found that it's very successful. Personally, I've had a lot of kids just come up to me and say, or even talk about it, which is kind of nice for student government to hear actual students, that be the topic of conversation for actual students. I definitely think it's been more successful than other fundraisers. I know we switched it for the fashion show, and I think people were initially a little bit disappointed, but I've definitely seen success in it, and I wouldn't say or regret changing it. And besides that, we have our senior prom coming up, which is basically a major event that all of our class is looking forward to. I definitely give a lot of credit to everybody that works for the senior prom, because I went last year and it was one of the funnest nights that I've had. It's really nice that nobody leaves the senior prom to go to an after party or something. Usually all the students stay the whole time. And it's also nice just to see all of the students are out on the dance floor, which is my favorite part. And it doesn't matter what social area you're in, everybody's there. It's a really awesome event. And student government is working hard to make it that great. And then our last event that we also have is we've been working a lot with the senior citizens. I know in town there's a senior citizen home. Earlier in the year we had a dinner for them before the play, and then we watched a play with them, and they really enjoyed it. And this upcoming May 9th, I think it is, we have a senior citizen to senior class picnic. which is going to be Beatle themes. So if you want to advertise that, it'll be at Harry Dunham. And we're really excited for that too. There's going to be some raffles, and student clubs are coming to help interact with the senior citizens. But besides that, that was just a big update on everything that's our senior student government is working on.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Who won, Mr. Ridge?
It was Ryan McCorky. Yeah, it was really funny.
What did he do?
Yeah.
What did he do?
He did, his best act was probably he kind of sang in like a girl's place, for like girls just want to have fun.
Sounds fun. I've been other years, but I didn't get there this year.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. You're free to go.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we are now up to item number 9, Board Forum on Drugs and Alcohol. We're going to start off with a little report on what the board and the administration has been doing since the last public meeting, which was about a month ago. I'm going to talk about what the Board of Ed has been doing on this topic, and then Mr. Markarian will talk about what the administration has been doing, which is a longer list than my report. I'll start off by saying that the board has been reading and studying up on the topic of drugs and alcohol prevention, the issues going on in our community and across the country. We've been gathering feedback from the community, and we've been working with the administration, the police, the Municipal Alliance, the PTOs, the Parents for Substance-Free Kids parent group, and there's a new community task force that's formed to address the heroin and opiate addiction epidemic, and we have also been participating on that task force. Our committees have addressed the drug and alcohol issue in our committee meetings this month. On April 11th, the curriculum committee met. We had a review of the health curriculum in grades K to 12, mainly focusing on 6 to 12, in terms of what is reviewed and taught in each grade relating to drugs and alcohol. As we saw when we looked at the huge list of topics that are mandated by the state to cover in the health curriculum, there is a lot to cover and not a lot of time. All of the topics are important, they all need to be covered. So we decided that in addition to having a summer committee review the curriculum to make sure that it's as current as possible and make sure that we're addressing all of the current trends and things going on in terms of drugs and alcohol, we also want to find ways to add more curriculum than what we can cover just in health class. So the committee is going to look for creative ways to find time to offer other modules about drugs and alcohol during the school year at the different grade levels at Lambs and Ridge. And there's already a lot of good ideas flying around out there, and we'll be getting an update later as that committee works on the health curriculum. Let's see. We discussed in curriculum with ideas to provide parents with more information about what is being taught in the health curriculum, possibly having the syllabus go home to get signed, having information go home to the parents as the students are studying this issue in school so that the parents can facilitate conversations at home with their students. We discussed ways to get student groups more involved in education about drugs and alcohol. There is a Ridge group already called Ridge Against Drugs, RAD. They have a seat on the Municipal Alliance, so they're attending the Municipal Alliance meetings already. So we talked about maybe ways that group could maybe expand to more of the student body and other things that they could do. The Ethics Club has addressed some of the topics relating to drugs and alcohol, and maybe their group would be interested, and maybe other clubs would be interested in forming. So we want to encourage the students to take on this issue at Ridge and at William Annan. Our policy committee met on April 14th. We had Ridge Assistant Principal Scott Thompson, Supervisor of Guidance Jillian Shadis, and Student Assistance Counselors from Ridge, Megan Hoffman and Chad Gilligan, come to the meeting to share their insights and so that we could ask questions about our current policies. We reviewed our current policies. The first one we reviewed, which you'll hear more about, and I'm kind of stealing I'll steal your committee report, then you won't have to give it later. We reviewed the health education policy, which basically says that we have to teach these topics about drugs and alcohol, which we had also reviewed in curriculum. So we did go over that policy and talked about how we were going to find additional time for drug and alcohol curriculum and to review the curriculum and update the lessons over the summer. We reviewed our policy on random drug testing for interscholastic athletes, which is a state law that's the thing that you sign when your kids sign up to be on a team. That tests for banned substances and steroids, and there are student athletes who have played in state championships who have been tested in recent years. That's something that is done through the, I guess, the athletic league or whatever, through the state. We looked at our substance abuse policy, and this is our suspicion-based testing program that we have at the high school right now. We looked at our data in terms of numbers of suspicion-based reports each year and compared them to other districts and found that our numbers are fairly comparable to many other districts, a little bit on the low side in the last year. So we talked about that policy and whether there's anything that could be done to make it be used a little bit more. Chad Gilligan did a quick survey of the staff to see how many of them have used that policy, what their experience was. He did find that a fair, I think it was like a third of the staff would like to have more staff training on the policy and what to look for and how to use the policy. So that's something that we're definitely going to follow up on and make sure that the staff is getting as much information and training as they need about that policy and how they could use it. Let's see. We talked about that policy in terms of the consequences if you test positive and whether there's anything we would want to add, such as community service, as an additional consequence if someone tests positive. So the committee will be following up on that. And then the last thing that we talked about at policy was looking into using breathalyzers at games, events, prom, things like that. And we got copies of policies for a policy on breathalyzers from our policy company that we use, Strauss Esme. So at the next policy meeting, they will be reviewing that policy on breathalyzers. And then our advocacy committee met on April 14th. Members of our advocacy committee have been participating in this new community task force. Linda and I attended both of the first two meetings of that task force, and Nick attended the second meeting with us. This task force has police officers, people from Bernardsville and Basking Ridge, but I think it was pretty Basking Ridge heavy. There were lots of people from the community. There were medical professionals. The committee is getting expanded. There are people from the school district. The committee is looking at all different aspects of the community and how the community can work together to tackle this. So the school is only one part of it. We found that on our part, they had kind of like a little list of things for each section to do, and we felt like our section had it fairly under control, that we're working with the Municipal Alliance already. We're already working with the police. We're working with the parents. And so we've got the ball rolling, and we'll be continuing to follow up on that committee. We met with, the advocacy committee met with the parents of substance-free kids, with a couple people from their group on April 15th, and we're going to plan to meet with them again fairly soon after this meeting. One of the things we discussed at that meeting was the Safe Homes program, which they have been talking to the Municipal Alliance about. And if anyone is unfamiliar with that program, it's a program where parents sign a pledge that they will not serve alcohol in their home to minors. And there's a list kept. There's a Somerset Hunterdon County organization. Do you know where that is? The Hunterdon Somerset Coalition has a list on their website, but that's for a number of schools. So we feel that it would probably be better to have our own list for our town, but it could include people that are not in our school districts, like private school children, families could participate in the program. That Municipal Alliance and the Parents for Substance-Free Kids are, I guess, working together to try to get that kicked off. Our advocacy committee's been talking with the Municipal Alliance. Linda is the representative from the Board of Education to the Municipal Alliance, so she's been at all the meetings. And just so that you all know, they have 3 follow-up events planned for the spring, follow-ups to Pills to Heroin. I think you got a flyer about the first one already. It was called like The Dilemma. It was about the dilemma of the prom and all the end-of-the-year parties and things and how to handle that with your children, which I'm sure is relevant for some people here. So they have 2 more events scheduled after that. There's one, do you have it right there? Want to say it real quick before?
Sure. There's one this week, April 30th, and that's about the prom and graduation and so forth. May 21st, which is also 7 p.m. at the town hall, is about the discussion of addiction. And on June 11th, There's another meeting, 7 p.m. at the town hall, on recovery, getting and staying clean.
Thank you. And I guess the advocacy committee has been brainstorming about ideas about how to communicate with the parents in the community on this issue. So now I'll let Mr. Markarian talk about some of the things the administration has been working on.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. So I'll try not to repeat a lot of what Robin said, although I think she tried to cover as much as she possibly could in a lot of the committees. So some of the things on my list are a little bit redundant, but you may be aware that the high school this month did Project Pride for juniors and seniors. That is the program where the convicts are brought to the school to talk to the students. And in this particular year, I know that a few of the folks that visited with the students had been incarcerated for drug-related events. The Pills to Heroin program that was for the community, we got a lot of positive feedback from that program, and the suggestion, of course, was to see if we could do something for the students. So I met with the student assistance counselors and one of the high school principals, assistant principals, and asked them to work with the Municipal Alliance, who I had spoken to, and found that they were really excited and happy to help arrange an assembly for students. So we set up a date on June 2nd for a student version, if you will, of the Pills to Heroin program, and that's going to be for sophomores and freshmen. Of course, we've been researching drug testing policies and looking at what other districts are doing. I've been collecting information over the past month from a variety of other districts, some of which have random drug testing, and trying to get more information about their programs. I've asked Mr. Howlett to write a letter to communicate further to some of to the parents rather, about follow up to the things going on at Ridge High School. You might have received that letter via Friday folder. I also asked him to provide some advice to parents in that letter. We had staff meetings in April to reinforce how they're supposed to report if they feel they have a suspicion-based issue in front of them. I've spent some time meeting with both the county prosecutor as well as the chief of police, and we've talked about a couple different issues. One is related to having dogs come and do a suspicionless sweep, if you will, of the building. You'll see a resolution tonight that'll be hopefully approved by the board in order to get that underway. You do have to have board support, community support, support of the local police department in order to make that happen, and ultimately you have to have the support of the Somerset County Prosecutor's Office, because they are the ones that make the arrangements. So my hope is that we can do that resolution tonight, and then I can reach back out to Prosecutor Soriano and try to finalize some plans to get that accomplished. We've had some discussion about Narcan. I know that that has been a product that police and EMTs have been talking about as an emergency response medication to an overdose situation, and so I asked our nurses to find out if that's something that they're allowed to have at their disposal, and at this time they are not yet allowed to have it at their disposal, but they are very conscientious about staying on top of that. Again, we talked about breathalyzers and the use of breathalyzers. As Robin mentioned, policy will be looking at a draft of a breathalyzer policy. We've also had conversations about staffing. In particular, the last couple of years, the principal of this building has expressed hopes to make the SRO, the school resource officer, full-time, and to add an additional SAC to the building, a substance abuse counselor. So that's certainly on our radar. Obviously, those are budgetary issues, and there's significant expense associated with any staffing, but we're keeping it on the radar to see if we might be able to find a way to fund that. We talked, the chief and I talked about a couple other things. One was the 911 immunity laws. Essentially, the situation has occurred in the last several years where statutes have been passed to allow individuals to have some immunity from prosecution if they are calling for help in the situation of someone who has essentially overdosed on drugs or alcohol. And so you might have received a letter from me via Friday folder last week that talked a little bit about that and shared with you a really nice flyer that the Berners Township Police Department put together that has a lot of nice resources on it, and it also mentions the 911 law. We talked about the new community task force on heroin and opiate epidemics, working with the Municipal Alliance. Here in this building, we hosted 21 for a Reason last month at a PTO meeting. Mrs. Hudak is working this week to put on youth summit programs and have them view both pills to heroin and in a split second, which would be a program that she's running this week after the students take the NJ Ask. And the other thing I spoke to the chief about as well was what happens in situations where someone is on public property and is underage possessing alcohol. And we talked about the disorderly person report that would be written by the police, which subjects the individual to a $500 fine. And the other thing I'm looking at are some signage products that we might be able to use around the district. That's it.
Okay, thank you. At this point, I know some board members would like to hear a little bit more about random drug testing. We've been doing lots of reading. I think the policies seem kind of straightforward, but there's a few parts that are a little tricky, and when people are talking about them, it can be somewhat confusing when people talk about opt-in, opt-out, and what that means, and what kind of opt-out, voluntary versus mandatory testing. So a few board members have asked that Nick just speak very briefly about that and field any questions that people have.
Sure. And you'll notice two folks to my right is Derlise Gutierrez. Derlise is one of the attorneys for our the firm that we work with that represents the Board of Ed, and I asked her to be here tonight to help answer some questions because the process of random student drug testing is pretty clearly laid out in statute. Not every single detail, but the process of the basic nuts and bolts about how it works. And one of the things that has been questioned quite a bit is the idea of, voluntary random drug testing and mandatory random drug testing and opting out of mandatory random drug testing. And so I think it might help to clarify a little bit how those things interact. The typical scenario in the random drug testing programs that I've read about that are used currently in the state of New Jersey use the word mandatory student drug testing, meaning if you are in a school-sponsored program, extracurricular activity, a sport, or you park on campus, if you want to have that privilege, you have to sign actively into the pool of students that would be tested randomly. If you opt out of being in the mandatory program, then you would not have those privileges. So opting out of a mandatory program means you don't have those privileges. I think the question has been, can you have a mandatory student drug testing program and have students opt out of being in the program and still have the privileges? I spoke to Derlise about that as well as another attorney that works with us on policies, and they explained to me that that is not a program that the law provides for. The law does provide that if a student or a parent of a student who is not in any particular privileged activity, they don't park on campus, they're not in any extracurricular activities, they're not playing a sport, they're really not in one of those privileged groups, parents could volunteer that child into the testing pool. So you can volunteer students into the pool. The idea of opting out, however, of a mandatory program and still having privileges really creates a voluntary situation. And if you think about it, it creates a different scenario, not necessarily good or bad, I'm not making a judgment on it, but it does create different scenarios when you have a voluntary situation where parents are signing their children in on a voluntary basis versus when the students have to be in it. It puts the onus in a different place versus one situation having the school district saying, in order to have the privilege, you need to be in the pool, and in the other situation, parents saying, you're going to be in the pool because we're volunteering you to be in the pool. So I wanted to try to clarify those two things, and I hope I did that.
Do any board members have questions about that? Linda?
Okay, the way the statute is written, I believe that the only consequences can be not being able to participate in your extracurricular activity or your parking. So if you're not in any of those things and you're in the pool, what would the consequences be for a positive test?
Well, you can be flexible in the consequences, but to a certain extent, but more importantly, it provides some information, because then that student would get the help and the assistance that you'd be able to.
I understand that part of it,
Oh.
but I read the statute, and at the bottom of it, it says that the consequences can't go beyond excluding you from your activity.
Right,
So I
exactly, because
understand
there has to
part
be
of
that nexus to the school district.
Pardon?
There has to be that nexus to the school activity in order for you to lose that privilege, to be,
Right.
try not to use the word punish, but, because that's not education speak, but in order to receive a consequence for having failed the random drug test.
Yeah, and I know that you get help and get counseling and stuff. I get that part, but
So I guess, did I answer your question, or is there?
I think what you're talking about is there's a state, there's a case law on this, which basically says that you can't take away. I think one school district in Hunterdon County, I think it was, tried to have everyone subject to mandatory testing. And you couldn't put everyone in the pool and suspend people for testing. And that's really, if you don't have any privileges, that one would believe that was what they were thinking, that would be the only option for them. So they, the court said that's not available. So, but we could come up with, my understanding of the statute is we could come up with any consequences we wanted to, short of that. So if we wanted to do educational programming, which I think is, if we're looking to get rid of the problem, we want to do things that are going to educate the student and try to intervene and change the behavior, right? So we could do those kind of policies.
Is that your understanding?
Yeah, that's it.
no, I think that's fine. I just wanted to make sure we weren't limited by the statute. That was the basis for my question, because the statute seems pretty, cut and dry the way through. Yeah.
To take it a step further, is the statute written that the removal of the privilege is done immediately following a first positive test?
The statute doesn't necessarily address that. That's something that you would
Okay,
have to
because
put
if
in
we're
your
going to put
policy.
other things in place like education and counseling, in some ways to me it seems counterintuitive if a child is very involved in the ethics club or an athletic thing. It might be counterintuitive to pull them out of that if they're getting counseling too, because sometimes things like athletics and clubs help keep them on track.
Well, that's something that you would have to work out as we put together your policy. Yes.
It's my understanding, though, that under any of those situations, the parents would be notified. So whether they were in a program or whether they weren't in a program, the parents would be notified. And I think they would be encouraged to get counseling and assistance. So under any of those conditions, whether they were in sports or they had a parking spot, there is that positive action.
Yes, any, regardless whether it's suspicion, whether the test comes about as a result of suspicion or whether the test comes about as a result of a random drug test, if a student is found to have tested positive, the district is obligated to notify the parents and put into motion. You have policies already on how to address a student who has been found positive for alcohol or drugs.
I thought that if it was a suspicion-based finding, that the police were involved.
Yes.
So that not only would the parents be notified, but and that's not true under random drug testing, but it would be true under suspicion if they're found positive.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Someone else have a question? Bev?
I have another one for Derlise, and this is an issue I continue to raise each time. It's my understanding, the way the statute is written, it's every single student with a privilege, but I still have a concern about students with special needs who might have some kind of sensory integration issue where the testing might be challenging for them to participate in, or students on legally prescribed medications. And am I correct in understanding that if those students choose to participate in a privilege, that there's no way for them to opt out of the pool? They have to participate in testing.
If the decision is to have a policy that requires random drug testing, and you have to you have to submit to random drug testing if you are going to participate in those activities, then yes, they would be part of that group also. But obviously, when the test is run, there have to be, I'm not an expert on drug testing, but there have to be provisions made for, I'm under such and such medication, that whoever is running the test will be able to take that into consideration, that I take a certain prescription medication every day that might show up as whatever, something that's a controlled substance, in order to be able to account for those types
That's
of
what I'm getting.
situations.
So that student would be forced to disclose that information to not necessarily the school, but someone involved in the testing process. The medical review officer.
Mike?
But there'd be absolutely no penalty for a situation like that. The medication was prescribed by a doctor and they're taking the medication. It means that it's not a positive fine.
The school would just see that they were cleared.
Yeah, I'm just concerned if it forces students to disclose private information.
If they're taking that serious medication, the nursing department probably is going to
Vicky?
I just want to clarify what I understand.
Speak your right. Pick it up.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I want to make sure I understand what was said earlier. So if there's quote unquote mandatory drug testing, and then if a student has a privilege, they must submit to random drug testing. And if the parent chooses to opt out, then they no longer have access to that privileges, correct?
Correct.
Now, the second part is where I'm not clear, is can we have, and I think we can't, but can we have everybody just opt in and then the school decides the consequences? Are we allowed to do that? Because then what happened, this whole opting out means you lose the privileges. So we have to know, is there a choice of setting up random drug testing without losing privileges? Or is that the only consequence we're allowed to get?
But if you set up a random drug testing program, and there's no consequence, the only reason for, I shouldn't say it that way. Part of the reason why you're able to have this random drug testing program is that the consequence will be the loss of particular privilege. If you have a random drug testing program and then there's no consequence whatsoever, then
can we make up our own consequences in our school if we do that? Or or are we going to be sued because we didn't make it up according to privileges?
Our recommendation would be that you follow the regulations and have the consequence be the denial of the loss of the privilege.
So you're saying there is no statute, no state laws to precedence, I don't know the right word, precedence for having this other type of testing in which we make up our own consequences.
That's what I'm
So
saying.
we would be open for a lot of litigation if we go ahead and do this?
No, not if you're, I'm just not sure what kinds of consequences, what other consequences you're looking for, you're talking about.
Service, there's other things.
I think Brady's concern is like, if someone were to test positive for something, correct me if I'm wrong, if someone were to test positive the first time, and we didn't want them to lose privileges, for example, we wanted them to get help. I mean, I'm assuming the ultimate goal is to get these children help, right?
Yes.
To get them the help and counseling that they need. And if, say, they tested positive the second time, then they can take further actions and build upon that. If we did a voluntary program and we didn't have the privileges, maybe you're asking what those consequences would be?
Well, I think that's what we were talking about earlier, that we could have some other types.
I think Elaine wants to say something.
Yeah, I'm an attorney, I'm not the board attorney, so I'm looking at it from my own reading, and I may not have it right, but my understanding is what the statute does, it sets out the sort of far limit of what you can do in drug testing, and that would be a mandatory policy that, what are the limits of things that you can do, and I think you discussed what that was. There's nothing in the law that I read that says you can't do something else lesser than that. And that's, I think, what we're talking about here, which is that there are other options. Not to say that any option is the right option. I'm just saying my understanding is that there's quite a bit of flexibility that we have. And that's, I think, part of the problem with the issue for people is that there's all different ways this could be done, as long as you're not going above and beyond what the law says you can't do, which is what that case I just mentioned earlier says, which is that you can't take away things. But there's certainly, you can do a voluntary policy. How you get in or out is different, but it's certainly not, it's not necessarily spoken to in the law. The law talks about a mandatory policy, and it says you can do it. It doesn't say you have to. That certainly leaves room, in my understanding, of a variety of other things that you could do as well. And certainly, one of the things that people have been talking about, and this is just, I'm not taking any position, I'm just relaying what I understand, is that people are looking to aid the students and not punish the students, which is what I've been hearing, I think, from the community, is that we could certainly, and we'd have to work on it certainly, you could have a policy that doesn't have punitive, that just really identifies the problem, tells the parents, or not, but I'm just saying this is one option, tell the parents, and maybe you give counseling or you give some sort of, some other project the student has to do about drug abuse or something. But that doesn't interfere with their academics, that doesn't interfere with their activities, that, as Bev pointed out, may be the thing that keeps the kid going and you don't want to take away. So I think my understanding, this is just my understanding personally of the statute, is that it sets out the limits, but we could certainly do something different that we thought was appropriate. That's my understanding.
Okay, so can I just speak for myself? I appreciate what you were saying is that there are parents who are just, there are parents who are just opposed to drug testing. So in respect of all the opinions that are here, and if there's a parent that's opposed, and even if they don't believe there's a reason for their child to be suspect, they just don't want to subject their child to it. So that means their child will lose all privileges.
No. We don't have to make that. That's just a decision that you could make. That's my understanding. Right?
No, I
that decision you can make.
I
think
think
we're getting confused
between
between mandatory and voluntary. If it's mandatory, then I think we have to tie it to the privileges, because the only way we can make people participate, the only way we can force people into a mandatory program is to tie it to the privileges, because that's what the law says. But if it was voluntary, then I think it's different.
So you're saying that
something other than
if it's 100% voluntary, then you don't tie it to privileges, and you could just do whatever you want to do, but which isn't much because it's not tied to a privilege. Other than tell the parent, and if the parent chooses to help or not.
I think this raises the issue, which is that we certainly need to talk about this more and think about what the parameters of any kind of policy would be. This is just my opinion. I don't think, first of all, to me, I don't know that we have any understanding of what people's views are on this at all, but it's hard to take a position if you don't even know what it is. So I think the first step is trying to understand what possible ideas would be.
Statutes to begin with, and what choices do we have to work with them, is what I'm trying to figure out. Susan?
I think the point of the random drug testing isn't, it isn't, you know, it is the consequences, but it isn't to, you're going to net in a big, you know, catch in a big net all these students who are doing drugs and have to do consequences. The point of it is, it's a deterrent, is what you hear. It's the deterrent, the toolkit. So, I mean, the consequences certainly have to be there and have to be administered if you implemented one. But you're talking about such a small percentage. The two statistics I see here in Hillsborough, last year they, it looks like they tested 43 students and 2 were positive. And in Hunterdon Central, they tested 1,113, and out of that, 15 unduplicated students were positive, which is 1%. So you're talking about such a small percentage that you have to deal with consequences. I mean, my understanding, the strong argument for this is it's the deterrent with consequences. But with that said, I don't understand why, and this is something I would like to address in policy, is being able to have the structure to have the deterrent for those parents who need it and want it for their children, but having the option, and maybe you have to make it voluntary then, for parents who know their children best and don't want them to be tested by the school, to be able to have the option of taking them out without having to withdraw them from their extracurricular activities, which really, in my opinion, aren't privileges. I mean, I think parking on campus is a privilege. I can't argue with that. But the sports and the clubs, you know, I think that those are, when you look at the state, you know, fair funding formula, they have allowances for all of those in the funding. So I don't know how you can, I know it's part of the statute that those are privileges and they're subject to being taken away. But I don't really look at them as that, as strong. So I think it's really unfair if a parent feels they don't want their child to be tested by the school, they want to handle it in their own way at home, that they would have to forego that ability to be in those programs. So, I mean, if this is something that, you know, the community is interested in, I would very strongly like to see some sort of avenue to be able to opt out a child in the privileges too, without not being able to have any of those activities. Do you want to say?
And I don't want to be,
Yes.
I don't want to be, I feel like I'm Madonna right now. I don't want to be overstepping my boundaries here, but I think that part of the, I think it might make it easier for everybody to be able to answer all of your own questions and how would it look, is if you actually put together a couple of policies so that you could work out all of these details and you could see what would this look like if it were voluntary. What would it look like? What would the consequences be? How would we address it? If it were not voluntary, how would it look like? What would the consequences be? How would we deal with children with special needs? How would we deal with, you know, a lesser consequence if the child is not in an extracurricular activity? I think maybe because I'm a very visual person, I just find it hard to conceptualize everything as we're all speaking. But I think that if you had a committee that was able to look at 2 types of policies even, I mean, because I don't think that you should limit yourself to, we're only going to pick one and just let's just look at one, but rather take a look at 2. And I know it's extra work, but I think that way you would be able to see how it would look and what the consequences would be of these policies, and you might be able to make an easier decision, or it might be, I
should say, it might be easier to make those decisions because then your own questions would be answered by looking at what would the outcome. And sometimes when you're writing it all down, then you come up, definitely are going to come up with even more questions that you'll be able to answer that way. So,
Thank you. I think Mike had his hand up first. Go ahead, Mike.
I certainly like that idea. We look at the options, but I wanted to come back. If you have drug use in the school, you're going to have peer pressure. You're going to have some problems. So it's not just that one set of parents wants their kids to be able to have drugs. That is has a harmful impact in the school. We just can't allow that because it's going to rub off. But I wanted to come back to the role we're trying to play is not to punish. And the idea that you lose 2 weeks of privileges and your parking privileges for the rest of the school year, those could probably be modified and made easier on first offense and then made more difficult on second. The important thing is identifying the problem, getting the parents involved, trying to get counseling. That's the beauty of this thing because it gets it out in the open for the parents. Most of the people I've heard that have the problem, the parents were oblivious to the problem. They didn't know what was going on, and then it gets beyond them, and then we have a major problem. We're going to have a death down the road. So I don't think we're locked into, but maybe I'm wrong, I don't think we're locked into losing parking privileges for the whole year or 2 weeks out of the whole year activity. I think that could be modified, to try and make it less harmful for the child, for the student, but much more, to focus on helping. That's the police with this, I forget what the medicine's called.
Narcan.
Narcan. They're concerned, we all have to be concerned about losing the children. And the fact that they're going that step, I think to get the nurses involved is a wonderful thing. I think the dogs, anything that we can do is a positive thing if we can get this problem better under control. And I don't think the object should be punishing, but it does act as a deterrent if the penalty grows. Or at least I think it does.
Christopher?
I'd like to add a couple of things to the discussion on drug testing. There really are two things that really should be considered very seriously. And I'm not sure if they're within the purview of this board to even discuss. But the first one is that a large study on 250,000 children, middle-aged and middle and high school students, which included districts like the one we're in. They found that there was, we're talking about 250,000 students. And what they found was that the evidence supporting random drug testing decreasing marijuana use was as strong as the evidence that random drug testing increases heroin and narcotic use, as well as methamphetamine use. So this was a large peer-reviewed study in 250,000 children. So this suggests that randomized drug testing doesn't do no harm. In fact, this study suggests that it may do harm as well as benefit. So it's not a clean story any longer. If I could use the analogy from the world that I'm from, if the FDA came upon a study like this with a drug that was on the marketplace and they found this new adverse effect in 250,000 patients, the FDA would probably immediately trigger an investigation to see if this was real or not. And they would issue a warning letter to the doctors warning them about the potential harm of this drug to patients. That's the first point. So I think that's really serious, and I'm not sure, I have a lot of training in clinical studies and stuff, but I think this really is beyond the credibility and the competencies within this board to really address, because we do need to make sure that we're not putting something in place that may actually harm our children now that enough evidence and data on random drug testing has been accumulated. And the second thing I want to say, which is most unfortunate, is that the standard urine tests that are used in random drug testing programs are really easy to beat, folks. In the years since random drug testing has been introduced, not only in schools, but when I was hired by some of the drug companies that I worked for, I had a random drug test as well. So there's an entire cottage. I wouldn't even call it a cottage industry. I'd call it much more than that. That you could go to any number of websites, and that includes things like the Huffington Post, where you have real, you have these people that actually look like they may know what they're talking about. Maybe it's hard to know. I haven't tested any of this myself, obviously. But the kids are probably much better at this than I am. They'll tell you exactly what you need to do to beat the test. So, if a test comes back negative, how do we know that there wasn't some manipulation of the test? So I'm not sure that the tests even do what they're supposed to do, because children are really, really smart, especially in our district, and they know more about this than I do. They can beat the test if they want to. So I think those are two very serious issues that unfortunately, despite our wishes and my personal wish that random drug testing would be a useful tool, which really should give us serious pause about this whole thing.
Anyone else? Mike?
I agree with your concerns. And I think, although I do have a note, I've got a little thing on my desk at home, it says 87% of the statistics that you read are probably false. So, I do challenge I do agree that that's a concern. And if heroin and the other harder drugs leave the bloodstream sooner, or detection, so if you only have 30 hours to test that, and if we don't have a better process, and if that's true, that's a concern. And if marijuana stays in the bloodstream for 30 days, yeah, I can see where that would be a danger. But then you talk about Hunter and Central, and they started drug testing, and then the courts challenged them, and they had to stop for 2 years. They saw a significant reduction. You could challenge those statistics as well, and I probably agree with you. We should know more about it. But when they stopped the testing, the drug use went up. And then finally the court settled in their favor, and they went back and they reinstituted the drug testing. And again, they dropped back down. Now, were those tests valid? We ought to be doing some research, I think, into that whole area of drug testing and find out what is the truth.
Here's the problem. Here's the problem with the Hunter data. The only parameter, and they have, this was widely, put across in the press. The only parameter that went down in Hunter, this is now data that's now 14 years old. We haven't seen anything recent. So, from the Alcohol and Drug Survey of America, Hunter has not put anything out from those surveys for 14 years. If we look at those data, as you indicated, when the random drug testing was suspended and reinstituted, the only benefit of random drug testing was on triple drug users. Alcohol use went up after random drug testing was introduced, and there was absolutely no effect on marijuana use. So it may be fine and good for Hunter to go around talking about that one line in their table, but if you look at the other 8 lines in their table or whatever, they really, and they're publicly available, they really, really do not make random drug testing look good in the least.
Lane?
My only concern there is that we haven't had them here, we had them here 5 years ago. I'd like to have them change.
The data are there for all of you to look at.
But I don't want to read numbers, I want to talk to the people who are doing the tests. And I agree with your scientific approach and asking questions. I couldn't agree more. But we haven't done any of that research. It's all computer generated. And I can go on the computer and find almost anything to be verified. And it's scary because the Huffington Post, I mean, no challenge, but I wouldn't be within 100 miles of that. So,
Well, if you wanted to beat a drug, if you wanted to beat a drug test, you could do it. So, you know, we're here. We need to do something that works.
Elaine?
You're in drug tests. You're in drug testing doesn't work because people can beat it very easily.
I guess what I'm hearing, just trying to figure out what our next steps would be, I was going to recommend maybe that we ask the policy committee to review this. And I just want to say that I have done quite a bit of research, and I know Christopher has as well, and we've provided those studies, of which there are many, and they're in the Dropbox, available to everyone. And I know it sounds to me, Mike, that you'd like, sort of a face-to-face discussion, but I think facts are facts, and it's useful to have them as well, so we can, whether you agree with the study or not, it's good to have read it and have it, and so we provide it to people, and then we can have a discussion about whether, we think one study is better than another, but certainly there are a lot of studies, and we have made them available, so I do recommend people read them, and, make your own conclusions. But if we, I don't think we can get very far if we're talking about this sort of amorphous idea of a policy that might be mandatory or might not. Maybe it makes sense to refer it to the committee to review.
Well, would someone like to make a motion to refer it to the policy committee?
I will.
Elaine, you raised your hand first.
Okay, I second that.
Okay, so I'd like to refer it to policy, and I'd like to see two. I'd like to see both types. I'd like to just see the details of a mandatory policy and then the details of a voluntary policy. And hopefully that will resolve some questions.
Can I ask you to even make it more specific, maybe even possibly more than one version of one of them if we have different consequences that the policy committee wants to look at?
Sure, that would be fine.
I don't agree with that. I think the policy committee should be free to do whatever they think after looking at all the facts.
I didn't say definitely more than one, I said maybe, depending. Instead of limiting it to two, depending on what the policy.
Well, there's only two types.
Right.
There's only two types of policies that are.
There maybe we'll come up with more than one version of voluntary, since other districts don't really have that. So I'm just leaving it open.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
And I think I would very much like to see a version that has resources for recovering punitive consequences as the consequences. Does that make sense? Not punitive.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are saying that they like the idea of consequences that are going to get the students help. So I think that should be something that the committee would focus on when they're looking at consequences too. Yeah, did somebody second officially?
Can I just ask? Okay. The SAC people.
If I could interrupt, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just for parliamentarian purposes, we have a motion, we need a second, and then you have a discussion.
But I want to add something to that.
Well, there's a motion, so the motion's on the floor, so let's have a second, and then we can discuss.
Okay, Mike seconded it. Okay, so we'll do, okay, now we'll do a discussion.
This has been brought up by the administration and SAC people and they have to live it every day. And I believe they have input and requests. I think we should maybe also consider that in policy is what is even requested by the principals of SAC people and in general.
Sure, Nick, go ahead. jump in.
So if this goes to policy, certainly I would make sure of a couple things. One, that the policy committee has the opportunity to get input from the administration, the SACs, but also that we can get more information and data for the policy committee to look at. And in particular, there's been a lot of discussion about Hunterdon Central Regional High School and their data. I think it's great to have the data in front of you, as well as a human being that you could talk to about their interpretation of their own data. Where did they get it? How did they do it? And I know from having reached out to several districts that they would be willing to have someone come and talk to us about it. So I think that that might give us some insight to their data and how valid that you believe it is or isn't might be clarified a little bit from that opportunity to talk to them. And also the ability to get some data from some of the other schools that have been doing this for a little while. And finally, to think about the concept of deterrent versus identification and getting people help. And I think that when you look at the recent history of districts trying to put these programs into place, the focus has been on deterrent. It's been an automatic that whenever someone's identified, whether it's from random or suspicion-based, that we get that person, that family help as much as we can. So I think when you look at the statute, it identifies that, but it also speaks to this notion of deterrence. And I think that the policy committee is going to want to think about whatever versions of whatever many numbers of policies they draft, what is the balance between deterrence and identification? And if we're concerned that after looking at all of the data, maybe deterrence is not something that is well achieved, then maybe that becomes part of the final analysis. That maybe it's only identification and the consequences go from there, which raises some of the legal questions about, you know, what exactly are you allowed to do? And that's why when we have our hands in the policies, we can then talk to council and we can talk about the different things that we may or may not be able to do. And you know, the fact is, sometimes you do something that maybe the law doesn't exactly speak to. If the law was written for deterrence and you want to write a policy for identification, then maybe you're going somewhere where the law hasn't spelled it all out yet. And you know, like Hunterdon Central went through a process where they had to, you know, they worked on something and then they stopped, and then they got some challenges and they got started again. I mean, it can be a long road to try to put into place what you think is best for students. And you know, I don't want to talk about crossing the lines. I'm certainly not an attorney, but I know that, you know, sometimes you do things and it helps to shape some new law. So, you know, if you want to put together a policy that's a little different because you've analyzed everything and you feel like the way you want to go is a little different, it doesn't mean that you might not still be able to. We would work with somebody like Derlise to see what we think might be best for our district and our kids.
We would need to go outside of the law as well. We would need to discuss experts in random drug testing and look at the 250,000 students and the types of statistics that were done. We would need that to be validated externally for our purposes. And I think that is extremely important for us to understand before to assess whether it is real, whether random drug testing may be associated with increased heroin opiate use, in addition to decreasing marijuana. We are not competent to make that assessment. We would need an outside body of experts, or one or two or three, to come in and tell us how do they see those statistics. Extremely, extremely important. Imagine if it really is true that random drug testing increases opiate and heroin and narcotic use. What are we going to look like 5 years.
Mike?
I think I agree. It ought to be a thorough study.
Anyone else have any comments? Linda?
It's my understanding that the American Academy of Pediatrics is going to be making some type of statement or assessment of random drug testing, and if that's the case, hopefully they have some expert advice on the matter. And I think it's supposed to be fairly soon.
I had heard May.
Yeah, so,
Somebody told me May.
yeah, so it would kind of be interesting to see, because, you know, certainly we would if it is in policy, it would still definitely be under consideration or discussion at that point.
That's a good point. Okay. Should we take a roll call about sending this to policy?
What is the motion?
Linda said the motion was to have policy draft, multiple versions, random and mandatory, possibly more than one type of, no, not random, what did I say? Did I say voluntary and mandatory? And more, possibly more than one version, depending on what they come up with consequences.
Can you say it again, please? I don't understand.
To have policy draft, more than one policy, being a mandatory and a voluntary, and possible iterations, so that we can understand them and review them. Does that sound like what you said?
Well, I don't know if I want to try to amend that, but I would rather see policy be charged with studying the random drug testing statistics and studies and coming back with possibly a policy draft of some kind, or maybe more than one. But I think the word study and validate should be in that motion. Instead of just go and draft something and come back. I think we need to have policy, maybe hash through some of those documents in the Dropbox and decide what we're going to do.
You need to speak into the microphone.
Yeah, okay, let's try to reword it. The motion, you want to try to reword it, Linda? Or do you want me to? Okay. I like what you just said.
For the policy committee to review and draft multiple policy options for random drug testing.
To review, well, we can say to review the data, review and draft multiple options for policies. Is that what we say?
I think that's the problem, and I think now we're just getting into semantics, but now it sounds like we're requiring them to come up with multiple options, and I think the way the committee process works is that we're sort of giving this to the committee to come up with some ideas and report back to us, but we can't force them to do anything. I mean, isn't that sort of the problem here, is that we're telling the policy committee what to do?
Yes, that's a problem.
And I don't think, we can't tell the policy committee, go do this and come back. We need to say, we want you to go consider this, and, it is our expectation, I think, as we're all sitting here, that that's one of the things that may happen, but we can't require you to do that as a committee, just from a political standpoint.
Okay, you take a stab at the motion then.
No, I don't, well, I'm not going to respond, but we're just trying to figure out a way to make this work, right?
Yeah.
We can't
How should we
require.
phrase the motion then?
I don't know that. I was just trying to explain to do it. Now, I would suggest, what do we have? Refer to study and consider and report back options, even? Is that? And I think the options will probably be that, but we can't tell you ahead of time what they should be. Is that?
Review available data and what Elaine just said. And develop
policies.
And develop policies.
Develop recommendations.
And policies to support the funding.
Okay. There you go. Good job, Mike.
And I will second that.
Okay. Everyone's okay with that now? Okay, now we can roll call.
Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
Mrs. Swarm?
Yes.
Dr. Barrett?
Yes.
Mrs. Cassell?
Yes.
Mrs. McGowan?
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw,
Yes.
Mrs. Richard,
Yes.
Mrs. Woolridge,
Yes?
Mrs. McCune.
Yes. Thank you.
Can I clap?
Okay, we are now up to board forum on drugs and alcohol. No, we're up to public forum on all. Sorry, it gets to be, yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, public forum on all agenda items exclusive of the budget. We're going to have the budget hearing after this, so if you have comments about the budget, hold those until we get to the budget hearing. So public forum on all other agenda items. When you come up to the mic, please write your name and address on the clipboard and tell us who you are. Please, thank you. And we're going to stick to the 4-minute time limit. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michelle Coppola, 44 Vanderveer Drive. I'm not speaking on behalf of the...
Can you move to Thank you.
I'm not speaking on behalf of the entire group, but there's a couple of things that I just want to point out in a general sense from my understanding of spending a lot of time with the group is I understand there's research and there's statistics. We want to try and save one life. So we don't care what evidence there is that, it may not be perfect, nothing's going to, fix the entire world. We totally get that, but we're looking to give it a try. So the idea that you have of the voluntary, it doesn't have to be mandatory, these punishments. As long as we can get something started where parents are buying in, parents are saying, please let us know. We want to know, we want to do something to try and help our children. So come at it where the first time there's no consequence, except now they're outed and their parents know we're going to get them into some kind of therapy or treatment, and maybe they do some kind of research or something like that. And then even if you get it to the third time and you say, you know what, at this point, you really don't deserve to be in an activity and there has to be a consequence, but put it down the road further so that the students and the parents both realize we're doing this to just let you know. If you can handle it at home, great. If you want to opt your kid out at that point, go ahead and opt them out. But just make it so that we get started. I also quickly wanted to share the idea that random drug testing increases heroin use while decreasing marijuana. And we're not suggesting to just test for marijuana. And although heroin's out of your system, I think anyone who's had an issue with heroin would say, if they can control themselves so that Saturday night they're not doing heroin, they probably don't have that big a problem. So that's not the kid we're worried about with heroin. Heroin addicts are doing it all the time. So we catch them within 30 hours. We're not going to just test for heroin. We're going to test for a range of drugs. So I don't know if that's really reasonable. The other thing I want to quickly share is I had the opportunity to speak to Susan Cooley, who's the principal at 100 and Central. And she would definitely come here. She's offered to come twice. She gave me a PowerPoint that I will offer to you guys. But she answered a lot of the questions, specifically the issue was raised at one point about privacy. And they said what they do is they turn the water off in the sink, they put glue into the toilet bowl, and they have the child go there. They can't bring anything with them. Someone goes to their class, they can't bring their pocketbook, they can't bring their backpack, unless they're going to carry around a urine sample with them all the time in their pocket. They're not going to be able to, have anything. And what they said is, if you come in and maybe you have someone sample, if you come out and the nurse doesn't feel that it's a body temperature sample, they have you give another sample. So they're not stupid. They totally have, come up with that. And then regarding the idea that someone may have a private, medical situation they don't want to disclose, what she said was, you have a representative, which is a medical resource officer, that's the level. So it comes to that level as a non-negative. At that point, the medical resource officer says to the pediatrician, this child has tested positive for such and such. Is there any reason that that is a legal thing? Is there anything that's been prescribed? Yes, okay, period, it goes back. No, there's no positive assertion for that child, so that is covered. But there was a couple other things I just wanted to really quickly. At Hunter and Central, it was 1,100 students were tested this year. 15 students tested positive. At Hunterman Central, the person who represented that, was responsible for those testing, they gave us statistics. In 2011, 85 tested, 9 positive. In 2012, 54 tested, 2 positive. In 2013, 70 tested, 3 positive. So there's not huge numbers of positive coming out. So maybe, the discussion and the fact that people are talking to their parents about it and talking to their friends, maybe just that alone is cutting down the positive results. And the one last thing I wanted to share about Susan Cooley is that she felt like it opened the dialogue in the district, that the kids that have been there for 12, it's been there for 12 years, and the kids take it in stride. It's just part of it. There's no discussion. They're just used to it. And if we start, maybe voluntary and do it a certain way, and then we readjust as we go along, I think that, we'll learn and grow and be able to, make adjustments there. So thank you very much.
Speaking as a parent. I'm not right now for or against random drug testing, but I think that whatever you do, it needs to be all the kids. I don't know why you would just test athletes and kids that are in clubs. That doesn't make any sense to me, because you're missing, first of all, I think it's unfair to those kids, but then you're also missing a huge chunk of kids that are probably more than likely the ones that are doing the drugs to begin with. And I know that there's crossover amongst all groups, obviously. And then I would also hate to see kids drop out of sports or clubs because they're afraid of the drug testing. So I think it has to include everyone. Thank you.
Anne-Marie Wolford, 54 Addison Drive. I was in your shoes a while ago, and I really don't envy you guys again. But thank you for sending it to policy this time. I think that's a really big step, a very positive step. Your work is very much appreciated, at least by me. A couple of things I just wanted to address as far as the research and the statistics of random drug testing, 250,000. There's data on both sides to support either case. So I think reinventing that wheel, we did that, how many years ago was it? When I was on board many years ago, looking at all those statistics and getting caught up in all that analysis only just delayed things and just created gridlock, and nothing happened, and we didn't do anything. And since that time, things have exploded, and we're still not doing anything because we have to do more research, we have to do more studies, we have to make sure that we do, it's going to go on for years and years and years if we keep just analyzing the data that's out there. There are results that we see from other schools that do this. I think we need to just send our kids a message that we're done. That, guess what, guys? No more dividing and conquering the adults. We're done with seeing our kids die. And try something to give them a tool so that when they're at the party, they can say, you know what, my luck, I'm going to be the one that gets tested tomorrow, so I'm not going to do anything. Give them a tool. We're making them accountable for their actions. If you recall from the Pills to Heroin Forum, the two experts there and the addicts themselves said, you have to make us responsible. There were no consequences to their drug use. That's why it escalated. Nobody held them accountable. This is one way to help hold our children accountable for their drug use. As far as the urine testing, yes, they can be beat. That's why they do the testing outside and not home tests, as some people have suggested. The parents can do their own home testing. Kids can beat those tests very easily. Kids who are using and using often that have a problem will know what to drink, what to do on a daily basis to mask whatever drugs are in their system. However, those outside testing places pick up what they're trying to do because they know exactly what the kids are doing in their system. So I think we really need to, again, send our kids a message that we don't want to see them dying. We don't want to see another one going to treatment. And I I appreciate your support, at least in the policy. And again, I think doing several different versions, whether it's online or opt-out, however you want to do it, consequences, no consequences. I think we need to focus on getting our kids help and saying no and deferring their drug use. And also those who have had a problem is getting treatment. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tammy Lane, and I live at 335 Lions Road. I'm a retired school nurse. I actually worked at Huntington Central as their school nurse before I moved to Bridgewater. And that was over 20-some years ago. We were losing kids then. You're losing kids now. I will tell you that I can't wait to hear what the AAP says, but I will tell you what the National Association of School Nurses says in their drug policy on random testing. And I believe that they have a very open mind about it. And I think that they have looked at those various studies. And what they said is that the jury is still out as to whether it's a good idea. But I would say that you need to stand up and you need to act. Have these dogs in, because the kids are smart. I can tell you a story about a 10th grader who came in to my office, and I knew he was using something, and I didn't know what it was. But I ended up sending him out for screening, and then another child outed him. And they just hadn't tested for what I knew that he was taking. But at least I got that child some help. And whatever the deterrent is, you've got people in these schools that once they're trained, if they can get the help, and I would say more, and I said this before when the drug this issue came up before, if you're going to hire the guidance counselors, the SACs, and the SACs should be doing their job. They shouldn't be doing bullying stuff. I was at that conference. They are trained to help kids with drug problems. Now, if bullying comes into it, then you know what? The administrator can work with the SAC. But they are trained. If you're going to intervene and guide these children, then you need the guidance counselor, the SAC trained person. So I do believe that you need to look at those things in a little bit more depth. And I would say that you cannot just because, stop trying to find. Be part of the solution. Be part of the random drug testing. Be part of a statistic that might save a life. Thank you.
Good evening, Tom DeDario, 46 Dykeman Place. I think part of the reason why it seems like such a huge decision is that everybody is looking at it as this long-term fix. But I think if we look at it as, we're going to try it, we're going to do it for a few years, we're going to see how it works, we're going to see if it works, we're going to see the lives we save, and then we're going to reevaluate it. Don't make it this huge, big, life-ending decision that we're going to have these thoughts that are going to go on forever and ever and impact the town. Look at it as we want to try something. We'll do it for a few years. If it doesn't work, nothing gained, nothing lost, except maybe the life we saved. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Georgiana Perro, and I live at 51 Riverside Drive. I come before you again this evening representing Parents for Substance-Free Kids and its members. Our group is a parent coalition of over 200